The House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I seek recognition. I have a motion to recommit it.
The House will come to order. Members will take their seats and cease their conversations. You want me to call out? Please vacate the well of the House. The House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Owens of New York moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1363 to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment.
I move to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection?
Madam Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky arise?
I wanted to reserve a point of order on the gentleman's motion.
Point of order is reserved. Is there objection to the dispensing of the reading? No objection, so ordered. Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this motion because this motion will ensure that the members of the armed services will be paid in the event of a government shutdown. There is no group who deserves our support more than the members of the armed services. As a veteran myself, I recognize the implications of failing to pay those members of the armed services who have given their time, their energy, their blood, and in many cases their lives in support of our freedom, the freedom that allows us to be here today and to have this heated debate over the direction of our country. When I look around at what will happen if we fail to pass this motion, we know that the President has indicated he will veto the current underlying legislation, which means, in effect, we will be unable to pay our military men and women. The economic consequences to the communities in which our military men and women reside, in my case, Fort Drum, as well as many active reserve units in my district, would be horrific. They will not buy gasoline, they will not buy groceries, they will not buy clothes. There are tremendous economic consequences to the actions that we have failed to take. I have supported the continuing resolutions previously, which have saved $51 billion from the budget. I'm not a person not in support of cutting, but we must do cutting and the decrease in the federal budget in a responsible way, not one which injures our men and women, particularly, as I said before, those who reside at Fort Drum and in and around that community. I think it's very important, as we move forward with this discussion, that we keep foremost in our minds the men and women in the military. I think we have not acted in large measure responsibly in this process. We need to move to a continuing resolution which is economically based, which will allow the recovery to continue, which will allow job growth to move forward, and not be focused on ideology or the slashing and burning of programs which are highly inappropriate. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman may not reserve his time.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I withdraw my reservation on the point of order.
The reservation is withdrawn.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized.
I rise in opposition. This procedural motion is nothing more than a dilatory tactic which comes at a time when we can least afford those types of things. Now is the time to act, not partake in political games. Our debate should be not about procedure. It should be about doing our job. It should be about funding our troops, about keeping our government running and saving the taxpayer money. The measure before us provides the essential funds for our men and women who are in harm's way on 3 battlefields around the world. Those who sacrifice so much for us should not be held hostage by Washington's inaction. While providing for our national defense, the measure also gives us 1 more week for the Senate and the White House to come to resolution on funding the activities of the government, and it cuts $12 billion in wasteful spending. The American people expect us to stop the partisan bickering and get our work done. The time for idle talk is over. Enough is enough. This motion is purely a political gesture and should be defeated. I think all members should know, Madam Speaker, all members should know this bill is not a political tactic. The real fact is that if you vote against this bill, you are voting against the troops who are engaged in 3 wars. I yield back.
The House will be in order. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, on this final amendment, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman requests the yeas and nays. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
And the House is voting on the motion to recommit. One last chance to change the bill before final passage. And next up should be final passage on the short-term spending measure, which would fund the federal government through next Friday, April the 15th, cut $12 billion, and also fund the Defense Department through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th of this year. This is a 15-minute vote on the House floor. Speaker, I should say Democratic Leader Pelosi and the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee, Chris Van Hollen, spoke to reporters earlier this morning not only about today's legislation, but about the broader 2012 package, which was approved by the Budget Committee last night. Their comments run over 15 minutes, and we'll show them to you during this first vote.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here today with our senior Democrat on the Budget Committee to thank him for his leadership, for his stamina in making the fight yesterday in the Budget Committee. Again, to congratulate him on his leadership and to thank the members of the Budget Committee as well. As we always say around here, a budget is a statement of our national values. At least it should be. It should reflect the priorities of our nation. And as we allocate resources in the budget, it should reflect those values. That is not what we have seen come out of the Budget Committee early this morning. The Republican budget is unfair because it has the wrong priorities. Ending Medicare for our seniors while we give tens of billions of tax breaks to big oil. Slashing support for seniors in nursing homes while we give tax breaks to businesses sending jobs overseas. Cutting education for our children, increasing the cost of higher education for nearly 10 million students while we give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in our country. Last night, the Republican Budget Committee voted to reopen the donut hole. Can you imagine that? To reopen the donut hole, forcing seniors to pay more for their prescription drugs. This is not a statement of American values. For America's seniors, according to AARP, the Republican budget would undermine Medicare's promise of a secure health coverage. And the nonpartisan CBO says it would force seniors to pay twice as much for less. That is when people enroll in 10 years. A letter from 17 Democratic governors says that the Ryan plan would cut Medicaid, as it cuts Medicaid, would severely undercut our ability to provide health care to our residents. And for the claims of fiscal responsibility, the Republican budget would add more than $8 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. $8 trillion over the next decade. Passing the budget and addressing our nation's economic challenges requires us to seek compromises. But threatening seniors' health and cutting off our children's education just to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires is not the middle ground that we strive to find. In fact, we're not going to find the middle ground if we're just talking about dollars and cents. We have to take this debate to a higher ground, a higher ground of our values, respect for our seniors, the education of our children, creation of jobs while reducing the deficit. And in fewer than 100 days, by April 15th, the Republicans will have been in the majority for 100 days. And they have put forth no jobs bills. In fact, they have voted for bills that slash jobs and rolled out plans to end Medicare. The so-called path to progress looks more like a road to ruin for Medicare and a road to riches for big oil. Put simply, it is unfair, it does not create jobs, it does not grow the economy, and it does not strengthen the middle class. I'm very proud of the fight that Mr. Van Hollen and the House Democrats presented last night, all day and evening in the Budget Committee. I thank him for his leadership, and I yield the podium.
Well, thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you for your leadership on these issues. And I fear that what we're seeing right now on the CR is just a preview of things to come when we get to the main event, which of course is the budget for fiscal year 2012. And what we saw all day yesterday in the Budget Committee was the plan the Republicans have. And behind the sunny rhetoric of reform, you've got the same old ideological agenda. Big tax breaks for the very wealthy in this country, continued big subsidies for the oil industry and other special interests, continue breaks for companies that ship American jobs instead of American products overseas, and at the expense of what? Cutting education for our kids, cutting essential research in science and development, including research to find cures and treatments to cancer and other diseases, cutting important investments in our national infrastructure, the kind of investments that have made this country strong, and as they talk about providing the very wealthy with an added tax break. You move the top rate from 35% to 25%, on average, millionaires would get a $100,000 tax break. Now, if you do that in a revenue-neutral way, who pays? Middle class taxpayers. And in fact, when we offered an amendment yesterday to protect those middle-class taxpayers, they rejected it. And all of these cuts for the very top so that they can cut away the fundamental Medicare guarantee for our seniors. And I want to be very clear about what that does. And there's no dispute about this. Seniors under that proposal will no longer have the Medicare option. They will be required. They will be required to go into the private health insurance market and fight for a policy and try and get a policy when the funds, vouchers, whatever you want to call it, they're given are going steadily downward in relationship to the rising health care costs. Seniors, you're on your own with the rising health care costs and the insurance industry under this proposal. It is rationing by income, and you will not be able to find the doctor you use if the plan that you can now afford doesn't have your doctor. Everyone's payroll taxes for Medicare now and all the premiums that seniors are paying for Medicare, where do they go? They go to the insurance industry, which stands to make a bonanza out of this, and seniors are left on their own. I want to close by making this important point. Number one, this is not similar to the Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan, as has been stated. Under the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan, there's what's called a fair share formula. The beneficiary and the provider, in this case the federal government, share the risks of rising health care costs. That is not the case under this proposal for Medicare. What they are saying is they want a much better deal for members of Congress than they want for seniors, because it was very clear that they're not changing those formulas for federal employees, as they shouldn't. But they're asking seniors to take on the risk of rising health care costs that they themselves, as member of Congress, will not take. And that is a very bad deal for seniors. It may be a good deal for the insurance companies, but from the perspective of seniors, Medicare is terminated in its current form, no more guarantee. You're on your own.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Van Hollen. As many of you, or some of you who were here at the time, 5 years ago, the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate had to meet the challenge and beat back a Republican effort led by President Bush to privatize Social Security. Here we are 5 years later, and we are fighting an effort on the part of the Republicans to end Medicare. Many of you also know, some time ago, then Speaker Gingrich said it will wither on the vine because people will voluntarily leave it. He repeated, voluntarily. This Republican budget goes that one better by eliminating Medicare. There is not even an option to leave it voluntarily because it will no longer exist. So this is a fight that our caucus is very unified behind. It's stunning to see the radical nature of what the Republican Budget Committee and the Republican leadership are proposing to America's seniors. We will not let it happen, and we're pleased to take questions on this subject. Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us what your understanding is of the latest in spending negotiations for this year and what the outstanding issues are that remain?
Well, you would really have to speak to the Democratic leader in the Senate, the President, or Mr. Boehner, because they are inside that room. But the understanding that we have is that they're working very hard. Let me say at this point that we do not want government to shut down, that we have made every compromise. In fact, we had cut $41 billion from the President's budget at the end of last year. The President and Senator Reid have gone much farther than that in meeting the Republicans more than halfway. But we understand that some of the concerns are about the amount and some are about the rider, but everybody understands that we cannot shut down government.
Madam Leader, Senator Reid was on the floor today, and he said that basically the numbers are getting very close, that they're almost there, but the outstanding issue now is over this abortion issue and the D.C. riders. I wonder if you could weigh in on that and tell us if you think that if that comes off the table, if any of your members will end up supporting.
I appreciate that you have said that that's what Senator Reid has said. I do not know that that is the sum total of the policy objections that exist, the policy differences that exist between those who are negotiating here. So far, we haven't seen anything that House Democrats can support, but we hope that they will arrive at a place that we can. Yes, sir.
Erskine Bowles, the President's Fiscal Commission Chair, told the Senate Budget Committee recently that America faces the most predictable economic crisis in history because of the national debt. And he said that this crisis is going to hit in about 2 years. Do you both agree with that assessment?
I'm going to yield to the budget ranking member, but I'll have something to say
Well, first, I think that the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission did a great service to the country by putting a lot of ideas on the table for discussion, and those have been the subject of a lot of debate, and I think some will move forward as we go through this process, and we'll see how it shakes out. Do we have a deficit problem in this country? Yeah, we've got to get our deficits under control over the long run in a steady, predictable way. That is not what the debate is about. The debate is how best to do that. And anybody watching the Budget Committee the other day would have seen a very different set of values and choices. Time after time, we said, you've got to make sure that the very wealthy in the country pay their fair share. You cannot say you're going to cut Medicare benefits for seniors, that you're going to cut education, and then say you're going to give the folks at the very top an even bigger tax break. Now, let me mention what Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson said about the Republican budget for 2012. They said it was not balanced and not comprehensive. Why? For the very reasons that I say. The Fiscal Commission's budget assumes that the folks at the very top will go back to the same tax rates they had during the Clinton years, years when the economy was going through the roof, lots of job growth. What happens in the Republican budget is they've chosen, as I said earlier, to give folks at the very top big tax breaks, special interests, big tax breaks, and that's why Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson said just the other day that it was not a balanced approach to dealing with the deficits going forward. We need a balanced approach.
So do you agree with them, though, that there's going to be what he called the most predictable economic crisis in history, that's coming in soon?
I agree that the most important thing that we've got to focus on is getting our economy back in full gear and getting people back to work. And that is our focus. And interestingly, and I don't know if you followed it the other day, but there's this sort of prediction that if you adopt this Republican budget, that it will create jobs. That prediction was made by the Heritage Foundation, the same group that predicted that the tax cuts in 2001 and 2003 would lead to huge job growth in the United States. They predicted millions and millions of jobs would flow from that. I think we all know the end of that story. The end of that story, we actually lost over 650,000 private sector jobs at the end of the Bush administration. So clearly, that was a failed approach. So our focus should be on jobs. It should be about the right prescription for jobs, and that's what we've been focused on.
I believe that the commission, the bipartisan Bowles-Simpson, Simpson-Bowles commission, presented many good suggestions.
This vote, the yeas are 191 and the nays are 236. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Under Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And the House now is voting on their 7th short-term spending measure for fiscal year 2011, which would fund the federal government through Friday of next week, through April the 15th. It would cut $12 billion from current levels of spending. It would also fund the Pentagon defense spending through the end of the fiscal year at a rate that is 2% more than the current level, but 3% less than the President requested. Final passage on this, what's ahead in the Senate, is to be determined, and still unresolved is the longer-term spending measure for all other spending outside of defense spending for the rest of 2011.
On this vote,
Mr. Miller of North Carolina.
There you go, Chris. Votes no.
Mr. Miller of North Carolina votes no. Mr. Whitman. Mr. Whitman votes aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole voted aye.
on this vote, the yeas are 247 and the nays are 181. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further proceedings will resume on H.R. 910, which the clerk will report by title.
Bill to amend the Clean Air Act to prohibit the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency from promulgating any regulation concerning, taking action relating to, or taking into consideration the emission of a greenhouse gas to address climate change and for other purposes.
Speaker.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor of the House. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. McNerney of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 910 to the Committee on Energy and Commerce with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendments. At the end of the bill, add the following. Section 5, protection of health of vulnerable children and seniors. Nothing in this act shall limit the authority of the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7401, as in effect on the day prior to the date of enactment of this act, to protect the health of vulnerable children and seniors, including children with asthma and lung diseases, from the effects of air pollution by large sources that emit 75,000 tons or more of carbon air pollution per year.
The House will be in order. The gentleman from California deserves to be heard. Please take your conversations off the floor. Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is correct. The House will be in order. And members and staff will take their conversations off the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer an important motion to recommit to H.R. 910. My motion is a straightforward amendment to guarantee that America's most vulnerable children and seniors, including children with asthma and lung disease, can be protected from the nation's biggest polluters. The Clean Air Act became law at a time when our cities were enveloped in smog, and since then the Act has stopped the most egregious polluters and improved public health. This motion is a substantial, important amendment, and if passed, the motion allows the vote to immediately proceed on the final passage of H.R. 910. We can reduce air pollution in a way that will create jobs, strengthen our economy, bolster our national defense, and improve the health of our children. I'm gravely concerned that H.R. 910 will threaten the health and safety of our most vulnerable Americans. There's a clear connection between air pollution and respiratory disease, and the motion I'm offering makes sure that our children can lead healthy lives. Asthma is an especially serious threat to America's children. This problem is national in scope, but my home state is uniquely affected. I'm honored to represent a part of California's San Joaquin Valley, but unfortunately the air quality is a persistent problem in our communities. In fact, as many as 1 in 5 children in the valley have been diagnosed with asthma. My own son and daughter developed the condition when they moved to an area of California's Central Valley with hot temperatures and poor air quality. I know from personal experience how vitally important it is to make sure our kids have fresh, healthy air. I'm confident that every member of this body shares my desire to reduce the incidence of asthma among America's children. Keeping our children healthy is not a partisan issue. Fighting for the health, happiness, and well-being of our children unites us as citizens, as parents, as friends, and as neighbors. But the statistics are sobering.
We'll suspend. The House is not in order. The gentleman from California deserves to be heard. Gentleman from California is recognized.
But the statistics are sobering. According to the American Lung Association, asthma affects more than 7 million children. More than 4 million of those children suffer from an asthma attack each year. Asthma kills 5,000 people each year in the United States and causes 14 million missed school days annually. And treating asthma costs our country more than $20 billion a year. In fact, every day in America, 40,000 people miss work or school due to asthma, 30,000 people have an asthma attack, and 11 people die from asthma. These are real children. These are real people. That's why I'm offering this simple, straightforward amendment to recommit today. My proposal is a common-sense improvement that makes sure that our country preserves the ability to protect the air quality for our children and seniors. The text of the motion is clear and explicitly says that our goal is to protect children with asthma and lung disease from the effects of air pollution. I also want to make one other point clear. Just as I know that every member of this body cares about the health and well-being of America's children, I also know that we care about our country's economic recovery. Many of this chamber feel passionately that we should do everything we can to make sure that small businesses and family farms can grow and prosper without facing unnecessary regulatory burdens. I'm proud to represent a district with a rich agricultural history, and I want everyone to know that this motion protects family farmers and small businesses. This motion is explicitly limited in scope to large facilities that emit 70,000 tons or more of carbon annually. In closing, I ask my friends and colleagues in the majority to reflect on what this amendment says and what your vote will mean. The amendment simply says, nothing in the Act shall limit the authority of the EPA to protect the health of vulnerable children and seniors from the effects of air pollution. What could be more simple than that? I ask my colleagues to do the right thing for our children and seniors and support this motion to recommit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I would ask for the 5 minutes in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would remind my colleagues that this is a procedural vote. H.R. 910 does not impact asthma. Frankly, our side would have liked to have debated this amendment. It was not offered to the Rules Committee. It was offered in committee where it was rejected on a voice vote. If you read the endangerment finding, you'll see that asthma is mentioned one time. As to asthma, EPA's endangerment finding refers only once to the term asthma, and then only in the context of wildfires and particulate matter, which is already regulated. So it doesn't change that. If you care about jobs, you're going to vote yes on the bill. If you're going to care about not increasing gas prices beyond the $4 where they are in much of the country today, you're going to vote for the bill, which means you ought to vote no on the motion to recommit and yes on final. The Clean Air Act regulates 188 different pollutants. H.R. 910 doesn't change one of those. So please, my colleagues, vote no on the motion to recommit, yes on final, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The gentleman requests the yeas and nays. A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This is a 15-minute vote.
Yesterday, the House wrapped up debate on a bill that would block the EPA's regulation of greenhouse gases. This is a motion to recommit vote on that, a last chance to change the bill. Final passage on the bill is next. This is a 15-minute vote. Just a few minutes ago, the House passed by a vote of 247 to 181. Another week of 2011 spending, a short-term continuing resolution proposing $12 billion in cuts. It would also fund the Pentagon, the Defense Department, through the end of the fiscal year. Again, that passed 247 to 181. It's now on to the Senate, where Majority Leader Reid has said that the bill is, quote, a non-starter, and President Obama earlier today threatening to veto that bill, the short-term bill, if it reaches his desk. Harry Reid and Speaker Boehner have just wrapped up meetings at the White House, and they have spoken to reporters just minutes ago. We want to show that to you, the comments of Harry Reid, at least during this 15-minute vote.
Good afternoon, everyone. We continue to have productive conversations. And you should all know they're polite, they're to the point, but there is no agreement on a number, there are no agreement on the policy issues that are contained with this. We're continuing to work toward an agreement because I do believe, all of us sincerely believe that we can get to an agreement, but we are not there yet. I did ask the President to sign the stopgap measure that we passed to fund our troops and to keep our government open. And I did express to the President my disappointment that he suggested he would veto that bill. Our goal is to reduce spending in order to lead to a better environment for job creation in America. And I do believe that it's important that we take this moment and get the largest spending cuts possible that will help our economy and help job creators back to creating jobs.
Well, we'll see you back here at 7 o'clock. The negotiators are going to start again at 3 o'clock today to see if they can work through the issues. We had a frank discussion. We had the necessary parties there to move toward a finish line. I'm disappointed we haven't been able to get something done to this point. But I am pleased that we're still working on getting there. In a matter of a little more than 24 hours, unless we work something out, the government will shut down. Essential services of the government will shut down. Security operations of this country, and on with the things that will really be detrimental, including, as we've learned from an economic report this morning, just a shutdown of no matter how long it is will be 0.02% drop in our domestic product. So we're going to continue to work to get this done. It's not easy to do, but it's doable. And as I said, we don't have a lot of time to do that. We're going to get back here at 7 o'clock, and we hope that that time when we come out, we'll have something done. If not, we'll, of course, have to look forward to the bad day tomorrow, which is government shutdown.
So you're coming back at 7 o'clock tonight for a meeting, is that right?
Senate Leader Harry Reid and Speaker John Boehner just a short while ago at the White House. You heard there that the negotiators will be back to work at 3 p.m. Eastern, so just a few minutes, and the Speaker and Leader Reid expected back at the White House this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will keep you posted on that. Here on the House floor, a procedural vote ahead of final passage on a bill that the House worked on yesterday, a bill that would block the Environmental Protection Agency's regulation of greenhouse gases. Final passage should be next. And just a short while ago, they did pass that short-term spending measure by a vote of 247 to 181, funding the federal government through next Friday, April the 15th. It's a day of lots of briefings from all sides on Capitol Hill. We also heard today from freshman Republicans in the U.S. House. Here's a look at their briefing from earlier.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming out today. I'm sorry that you have to come out today. It is day 47, and again, we're at zero. We're standing here on the Senate steps asking Senator Harry Reid to lead, take action. We need to make sure that we're funding our troops, that we're responsibly funding government. I took the liberty of doing some numbers, and estimated cost of a shutdown back in 1995 was $71 million a day. Right now we're looking at $176 million a day in cost. It's irresponsible to continue on this path to government shutdown. We're standing here saying we want responsible funding of government. We can do that. We can cut costs. This is not a lot to ask. The American people understand it. They're with us on this. We have a huge base of support in the House of Representatives. As you can see, that number continues to grow, and we're pleased to welcome the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Jeb Hensarling.
Thank you, Rick. Even though it's a beautiful day in the nation's capital, again, I am sorry that we all have to be here. Again, day 47, and absolutely no action right behind us to keep the government open. Not one single bill. The House Republicans have led. We have led with H.R. 1, a bill to keep the government open and to put America on a fiscal, sustainable path. We gave it to them again. Still no action at day 47. But one of my colleagues yesterday, I think, put it best, and that is House Republicans are working to keep the government open in order to spend less. Senate Democrats are trying to shut down the government in order to spend more. It's really quite that simple. They've had this many days to work to keep the government open. The least they can do when we have troops in harm's way, when we have brave men and women who are fighting our foreign enemies, is to at least make sure the troops get paid on time. So yet again, under the leadership of our Speaker, for the third time, we will have a bill that will fund the troops. This is specifically a troop funding bill. Every single day I have a constituent of mine ask me, Congressman, will the government shut down? And unfortunately, I only have one answer, and that is you're going to have to ask Harry Reid. For the sake of our troops, let's hope the answer is no.
Thank you. That's our conference chairman, Congressman Jeb Hensarling. We're pleased to be joined by Senator Jim DeMint from South Carolina. Senator.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just here to thank the House Republicans for leading. As we look in Washington right now, the president's AWOL on leadership. House Republicans sent us a funding bill for the government last month, and they're going to pass another one today, doing everything they can to be responsible. But if the President doesn't lead and the leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, doesn't lead, it makes it very difficult for the Republicans alone in the House to make things work. But what they're doing here in funding the military for the rest of the year is critically important to give some predictability and certainty to our troops and the planning that has to take place. Again, the President and the Democrat leadership here has been irresponsible, and there's no reason for this government to shut down. The only reason is the Democrats think they can win the PR battle here. And we need to make sure that Americans get the truth, and Americans got a lot more sense than Harry Reid gives them credit for, and they're going to figure this out. This is irresponsible government. The President has us on a pathway to bankruptcy as a country, and I'm very thankful for the House Republicans today, and I just wanted to come over and stand with them because I'm proud of what they've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I want to introduce the gentleman from Colorado, Corey Gardner.
Well, Senator, I didn't realize the air was that much different over here on the Senate side.
This is the dark side.
But it must be different. From the Rocky Mountain state where we hear complaints at times about our high altitude and the thin air, well, there must be some thin air over here in the United States Senate because they have failed once again to get their job done. After wandering in the wilderness for more than 40 days, they have failed to get the job done. You know, this country is demanding some budgetary slim fast. And it's time that we put this nation's fiscal course on a diet. That's what the American people want. On November 2nd, 2010, they said, go do your job. Get this nation back on track. Do the right thing for the people. And what the people are right now demanding is that we fund our troops, that we cut spending, that we grow our economy. Yesterday, I had a chance to meet with a family from my district. They brought their kids, they brought the whole family. And their dad said, you know, we had an opportunity. We asked the kids if they wanted to go to Disneyland or Washington, D.C. And the kids chose Washington, D.C., although I doubt if they knew they were coming to Fantasyland here, too. Because at this Fantasyland, the body behind us doesn't seem to know that we have troops on the line. They're putting their lives, time in and time again, on the line. And it's time we act and do the responsible thing. Ask Harry what he's going to do about our troops. Ask Harry what he's going to do about funding for our country. Ask Harry what he's going to do for our economy. Because right now all we hear is thin air.
Thank you, Corey. Pleased to introduce the gentleman from New Hampshire, Congressman Frank Ginta.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Senator, for being here. And thank you all for being here. This is day 47. And it is time for Senator Reid to act swiftly and to be responsible to the American people. Back in November, we heard a very loud and clear message. It was restore fiscal discipline, restore fiscal responsibility, reduce our debt and deficits, but get things done on behalf of the country. The House is acted, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and we're about to act again and send a piece of legislation that is responsible, that reduces spending, but that keeps the government running effectively and efficiently. And that's our goal. But we need a partner in the Senate. And Senator Reid is not being a partner. He is playing politics, and he's sending the wrong message to every hard-working American, to everyone who wants to see a brighter, better future. He's sending a message that the Senate will fail, that the Senate is going to fail our nation. And that's not what we're about. We are about a positive, proactive, and responsible budgeting plan that gets our fiscal house in order, that changes the trajectory of spending in this nation, just like every family has to do in America. We simply ask the Senate to lead like husbands and wives had led their own families. Nothing more, nothing less. But if he fails, and this government shuts down, it's on him. It is on him and the Senate Democrats, and that would be a shame. And I thank my colleagues for standing so strongly with the country and with the future of our nation.
Thank you, Frank. I want to thank all the members that have been so steadfast in their support of our efforts here, and I want to acknowledge from Indiana, Congressman Mike Pence.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman for Arkansas for his courageous leadership and the leadership demonstrated particularly by all the new members here. And it's an honor to stand with those that I've I've stood with in these battles over the years as well. We are now less than 37 hours from a choice. The American people have a choice to make. Do they want to continue this era of runaway federal spending that happened under both political parties? Do they want to continue the era of borrowing and spending and bailouts and takeovers? Do they want to continue an era where the Treasury and the budget fails to respect the broad mainstream values of the majority of the American people? Or do we want to stop and turn and begin to take our country back in the direction of fiscal responsibility, respect for the Treasury, and respect for values? That's the choice that we face less than 37 hours from now. The truth is the American people have already made their choice. Last fall, on Election Day, in a deafening message, the American people sent a new majority to that chamber. They said they wanted to end the borrowing, the spending, the bailouts, and the takeovers. They wanted a government as good as our people. They wanted a Treasury and a budget that respected our values. Now, Senator Harry Reid on the House floor this morning said that this is about ideology. But let's be clear on this point. Senate Democrats are threatening to shut down the government because they oppose a 2% cut in the federal budget this year. Let's be clear on this point. Liberals in the Senate are threatening to shut down the government because they want to continue to borrow money from China to underwrite the largest abortion provider in America. Harry Reid may be right about what's driving liberals in the Senate. What's driving these Republicans, what drove the American people to send a new majority to Washington, D.C., is a fundamental desire to steer our national government back to fiscal responsibility and reform. Today on the floor of the House of Representatives, House Republicans will say the troops come first. We'll take our troops out of harm's way in this fiscal battle. We must not let fiscal battles in Washington, D.C. threaten the support for those that are fighting the real battles. I urge my colleagues in the Senate, drop your ideological fights, heed the voice of the American people, support us as we support the troops, and join us in the modest budget reforms that we have sent to the Senate floor.
Thank you, Congressman Pence. As he said, in just minutes, we're going to go over and cast a vote to support our troops and responsibly fund our government. Before we do that, we want to give you an opportunity for a quick round of Q&A. I'm going to defer to my colleague, the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Ken Seko.
Thank you.
Question and answer.
Yeah, questions. We're running really low on time to get anything through, even if there is an agreement. Just a three-day rule, getting something through the Senate. Would you support a few days of a clean CR in order to work out all the paperwork for some sort of grand bargain? Right now, what we're working on is to protect our troops.
On this vote, the yeas are 175 and the nays are 251. The motion to recommit is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
On that vote, I call for the yeas and nays, a roll call vote.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
This is the final passage vote on a bill that would block the EPA's regulation of greenhouse gases. A 5-minute vote on the House floor, and likely to be the last recorded vote of the day. A short while ago, they did pass by a vote of 247 to 181. The latest, the 7th, short-term spending bill for fiscal year 2011, funding the federal government through next Friday, April the 15th, also providing funding for the Defense Department and making $12 billion in cuts based on current levels. That passed the House just a short while ago. Speaker Boehner and the Majority Leader Eric Cantor are briefing reporters, or will be shortly, and you'll be able to watch that briefing live momentarily online at cspan.org. Also, while you're online, our Twitter pages and Facebook pages are fairly alive with comments. You go to facebook.com/cspan or use the Facebook link off of our homepage. We're asking you your thoughts on a possible government shutdown and how it would affect you. Jeremy June writes, "Shame on Republican voters that voted for Bush and had no problem with record trillion-dollar deficits when he and the Republican Party doubled the national debt, but now spending is a problem." Meanwhile, Craig Hill writes that Obama, using troops as a political pawn, said a government shutdown the military wouldn't get paid. Apparently, Obama is promising that IRS agents will still get their paychecks, though. Lots of comments there on our Facebook page, and also you can read some of the tweets as well from members of Congress, from people who are covering the debate on Capitol Hill as well. All of that linked off our homepage at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 255.